All right, so we're going to continue today with fibers, and this is going to be our last session on fibers. We already talked about regenerated fibers like rayon, lyocell, acetate, triacetate. We talked about synthetic fibers like polyester, nylon, olefin, acrylic. Today we're going to talk about some of the special use fibers that are used in applications other than apparel mostly. The most important category here is the elastomers. So elastomers, if you guys ever seen that rubber band ball, all of those are elastomers. So elastomers are any natural or synthetic polymer which can be stretched repeatedly at room temperature, at least twice its original length. And then it comes back to their original length when you release them. So elastomers have an extra stretch, an extra elasticity. These are fibers like spandex, for example, or there are elastin. There are a lot of other fibers that we can count in this category, but spandex is probably one of the fibers that you've heard of that is used in apparel for extra stretch. When we talk about stretch, we talk about two different kinds of stretch. Comfort stretch is ability of a fiber to elongate slightly as the body moves, so it is a comfortable stretch. So it stretches enough to make you feel comfortable. But power stretch has some extra stretch. And when we talk about power stretch, for example, if you think about suspenders on pants, the suspenders have power stretch. Those have some extra stretch. But if you talk about, for example, your denim jeans that have some stretch, that could be comfort stretch. Or if you talk about tummy shapers and body shapers, those type of fabrics usually have power stretch. In power stretch, the fabric can stretch up to 30%, 50% with good recovery. And we use these type of materials in active sportswear or any foundation garments like the tummy shapers and things like that. Sometimes swimwear, belts, suspenders, some surgical support products. Comfort stretch usually has about 10 to 15% stretch. And this just gives the garments enough elasticity that you feel comfortable. This is on apparel and furnishings in general. Now, another elastomer is rubber. Rubber is what you have for your erasers. Those are generally made out of rubber. But rubber can be natural and it can be synthetic. Natural rubber comes from a tree, and the tree barks have this white latex liquid that they release, and rubber is made out of that. Synthetic rubber is an imitation of natural rubber chemically, so the molecular structure is imitated in natural rubber and it's created synthetically. Synthetic rubber is a copolymer of acrylonitrile, about 10 to 50%, and also a diene, like a butadiene, and also about 35% copolymer of chloroprene or polychloroprene. So synthetic rubber is made of those type of chemicals, and we use synthetic rubber in tires and in so many other applications. Common properties of rubber: it has excellent elongation, it has great elasticity, almost 500, 600% elasticity. It has low tenacity, so it doesn't have too much strength. And you can tell this, you know, some rubber products usually go through an aging process, and over time they will start to either lose their elasticity or they will start breaking apart. So they don't have very good strength. They also have poor resistance to aging, sunlight, oil, perspiration, oxidizing agents. They are not very easy to dye. They are hydrophobic in general. Neoprene is another type of rubber that's made out of polychloroprene. If you think about those gloves that they use in medical areas, hospitals, the gray silver colored gloves, those are usually made out of neoprene. They're resistant to acids, alkalis, alcohols, oils, caustics, solvents. So they're used in protective gloves and clothing, wetsuits, industrial hoses and belts, anti-corrosive seals, membranes. So it has a lot of different uses. So a lot of those special use fibers are not used in apparel, but they're used in those type of applications. Now let's talk about spandex. Spandex is interesting because it's an elastomeric fiber that has soft segments and hard segments. So if you look at this, this is the structure. These are the flexible segments, and those are the rigid segments. So when you stretch this, the flexible segments stretch like this, and it gives it so much stretch because of that. And then when you release it, the flexible segments retract right away. And because the rigid segments are rigid, it also pulls the flexible segments together. And that's how you can get so much stretch with those type of materials. Spandex is also called elastin. Lycra is a trademark, registered trademark of spandex. And this is when this fiber was first developed by the company Invista, which is related to DuPont. Spandex can be produced by wet spinning or dry spinning. We have to add delustrants because it has too much luster. You sometimes add dye receptors, whiteners, lubricants into the solution as well. And we use them a lot in activewear for garments that needs to shape to your body really well. They can be produced as a monofilament or a multifilament. So when I say monofilament, it means the yarn is made out of just one single filament. If it is a multi-filament, that means the yarn has multiple filaments in it that are put together. It can be produced in different sizes. It is usually white in color, sometimes gray. And the size, the fiber diameter is between 20 to 4,300 denier. Finer yarns, of course, stretch a lot more, especially in hosiery, we use finer yarns. Coarser yarns stretch a lot less, and we use coarser yarns in swimsuits and foundation garments. This is a view of the spandex fibers. We hardly ever use spandex alone in a garment. Spandex is only used to add stretch to other materials. For example, if you have 98% cotton t-shirt, you sometimes have 2% spandex in it. So spandex is always added as a 1%, 2%, just to add some stretch to the garment that we are wearing. They're more durable than rubber. They have a little better tensile strength and flex life, but elongation and elasticity is similar to rubber. And spandex has better resistance to body oils, perspiration, chemicals, and aging. So we always combine spandex with other fibers. And if you think about, tights and leggings, a lot of those have a certain percentage of spandex. And spandex yarns look like this if they are alone. But again, we hardly ever use them alone. It's always a little percentage of this in a garment. And this is a fabric that has 3% spandex, but it is 97% polyester. So the main fiber is polyester here. But I want you guys to pay attention to something here. You see these little white yarns that are breaking apart. Those are actually the spandex yarns. And over time with the stretch, they usually break apart. And you can tell it has spandex when you see these yarns breaking out. And how we make this fabric is you actually have polyester yarns mostly, and spandex is this almost colorless or whitish color yarn that makes up the core of the yarn. And then you have polyester yarns that are wrapped around the spandex yarn. And this is the yarn that we use to weave this fabric. So the fabric uses this polyester yarn that is wrapped around a spandex core. This is a swimwear made out of spandex and nylon. So it's a nylon and spandex blend. This is an undergarment made with some spandex yarns. Now, one of the things about spandex is that those yarns will break. And when they break, and you can see them on the surface of the fabric, we call it a grin through. So you can see them a lot better here in this fabric. All of these broken yarns are spandex yarns that kind of came out on the surface because they broke and separated from the main yarn. So this fabric here is 97% wool and 3% spandex. These are pants. The lining is polyester, and it has been rubbed against the body so much that some of those spandex yarns broke and they are now protruding on the outside of the garment. So if you ever see these, those are usually spandex yarns, and we call this grin through. Spandex yarns can be used in 3 different ways. On here, for example, on the fabric, you don't really see the spandex yarns because they are hidden inside the polyester yarns. Now, another way spandex can be used is you can also use it as a bare yarn, where you can actually see it in the fabric, or we call core spun. So bare spandex yarns are used in hosieries. So this is an example of that. These are knee highs, and this is the elastic part of it. So those are the spandex yarns on the elastic part, which kind of stretches onto your leg to hold the knee highs. So those are bare spandex yarns. They're not covered with polyester or anything. So those you can see on the top of the knee highs, and you can tell it's just bare spandex. Covered spandex is not visible from the outside. So we use them in support hoses, foundation garments, or any elasticized thread. So for example, this is a good example of this. This is a metallic yarn, and inside the metallic yarn, you see spandex. So this is a monofilament spandex strand inside. And then we wrap that with some kind of multi-filament synthetic yarn. This could be a polyester yarn, for example. And then after wrapping it with that, we also wrap it with this metallic monofilament strand. So when you look at the yarn, you can only see the metallic part of it mostly. You never see the spandex. So this is called a covered yarn. And sometimes spandex yarns are used in that way. So if you see a metallic yarn that has a lot of stretch, that's because it has the spandex inside. This is another yarn where spandex is in the inside. So this is spandex or some kind of elastomeric yarn in the inside. This is actually a braided yarn, and the braiding is done over those elastomeric yarns. So these are not visible when you look at the yarn. Core spun spandex is used for power stretch generally. So in that case, when you're spinning the yarns, you're using spandex as the core, and then you're spinning or twisting and wrapping the spandex with some kind of other fiber. So in this case, this is the core, that's spandex, and it's wrapped with cotton fibers. And the yarn looks like that in general. So you can't really tell the spandex yarn here. Spandex yarns are generally transparent when you look at them, but they can be delustered or dyed. The opacity really depends on the amount of spandex. In comfort fabrics, the percentage of spandex is too low to impact the covering power because we only use 2% or 3% spandex. It has good resiliency. We don't use spandex in carpets because crush resistance is not very good. Dimensional stability of spandex is good. It doesn't shrink. It has excellent elasticity and elastic recovery, so shape retention is good. It's blended with fibers like cotton, polyester, or wool. It can be blended with anything to give it some stretch. It has very low moisture absorption, and it does have static because it's hydrophobic, so it will always have a static buildup problem. It doesn't irritate the skin, so it's really not an allergen, but rubber can be allergenic. So some people are allergic to rubber, but spandex won't give you that kind of allergies. Even if you're allergic to rubber, spandex will not bother your skin. The strength is low, but we always use it with other yarns anyway. So polyester, for example, has really good strength. So if you blend 2%, 3% spandex with 97% polyester, then it's really not an issue. Abrasion resistance obviously is going to be low because the strength is low. And that's why those fibers break and we have this gluten through problem. It has good resistance to light. Rubber generally deteriorates very easily. So spandex is much better than rubber, natural rubber or synthetic rubber, because it has a little more resistance to aging compared to those materials. When you're cleaning anything made with spandex, you just have to follow the care labels. It's resistant to cleaning chemicals, but it is damaged by bleach. So that's why we have to wash our swimsuits after we use them in a pool, because the chlorine in the pool is going to damage your swimsuit. Ironing, it's a thermoplastic, so it's going to melt. So you have to be careful when you iron a fabric that has spandex in it. Storage is not a problem because it is not affected by mildew, moths, insects. It's very easy to care for. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about rubber. Rubber is this white latex that comes out of that tree, and we collect those and then dry them, and once they are dry they become elastic. So this is natural rubber. The liquid, the latex that comes out of that tree looks like this when you first take it out. And those trees grow in certain parts of the world. But there's a difference between rubber and spandex. Spandex is a lot more durable than natural rubber. The tenacity of spandex is better. Elongation and elasticity is very similar. But spandex also has better resistance to body oils, perspiration, chemicals, and aging compared to rubber. It's more resistant to lotions, cosmetics. Those type of chemicals can deteriorate rubber, but it doesn't really affect spandex. And the flex life is good. And when I say flex life, that means when you bend spandex over and over and over, it doesn't break as easily as rubber does. Rubber will eventually break. About rubber, I do want to mention one thing. In the past, rubber was used to make shoes, and especially with natural rubber, somebody came up with this, and they made shoes that are very comfortable, because until then people were using wood or other hard materials for shoes. And when they discovered rubber, they started using that for more comfort. But one thing that happened with rubber back in the day, I'm talking about ancient times, in the summer, rubber would start getting mushy and soft, and Of course, with heat, it just loosens up. So it would lose its function as a shoe material. In the winter, in cold temperatures, it would also get too hard and brittle. So when we talk about rubber, you can also think of chewing gum. Chewing gum is a type of elastomer, actually. So when you're chewing it in your mouth, chewing gum is warm, so the warmth makes it soft and mushy. But if you put chewing gum in the refrigerator, you can just break it apart, it will become brittle. So this is what rubber used to do. And over time, people started to use rubber in tires. But it was another problem with rubber. In the hot temperatures, it would get mushy and soft. In the cold temperatures, it would get brittle. So to overcome this problem, this one guy started doing experiments, and somehow he managed to take rubber and to vulcanize it. And this was, some say it was an accident. Accidentally, some sulfur got into the rubber, and they realized that it really strengthened rubber so that in the hot temperatures, rubber didn't start loosening up or softening. And in cold temperatures, it stopped being so brittle because of the vulcanization. And this was invented by somebody called Goodyear, and he's the one who actually came up with Goodyear tires, because rubber was one of the main materials in tires. And Goodyear was the person who figured out a way to make rubber last longer in different types of temperatures. And I wanted you guys to think about that. This is what we use in tires and in a lot of other industrial applications, actually. But you can cross-link rubber, basically the molecules, you can cross-link them with sulfur to create a stronger material, or at least, the molecular chains don't loosen up anymore because there's a link that holds them together. But then they discovered spandex, and spandex had better properties than rubber. So now we use spandex in a lot of garments. We also use spandex in industrial applications and in furnishings. These are some examples. This is a 97% polyester, 3% spandex. Jacquard fabric. This is also the same composition. This is the same composition as a plaid fabric. This is a poplin fabric with cotton and spandex, 97% cotton, 3% spandex. Another twill fabric with polyester spandex, and this is a corduroy made out of polyester and spandex. This is the plaid fabric, and if you take out each yarn and look at it, the yarn looks like this. And if you try to pull apart the polyester, you can see that the almost invisible yarn in the core of that yarn is spandex, and polyester is wrapped around the spandex. This is lycra. This is the spandex that is produced by the company Invista, or DuPont, actually. This is an example of those broken spandex yarns, and you can see this is the yarn, and this is the core where the spandex is, and the strands of spandex gets broken, and then you can see them on the surface of the fabric. These are some athletic wear that is made out of spandex. If you see a lot of stretch on a garment, there's always spandex in it. A couple other elastomeric fibers. Elastoester. This is a synthetic polymer that has 50% by weight of aliphatic polyether and 35% by weight of polyester. The elongation on elastoester is about 600%, so it does have a lot of stretch, but it's not a very strong fiber, and it has lower elasticity compared to other elastomers. It's used in outerwear and furnishings generally. Elastoral P is another bicomponent polyester. It's a variation of polyester. It has good stretch with excellent recovery, easy to care for. We use them in active sportswear, leisure wear. Lastol is another one that is an elastic cross-linked copolymer olefin. So it's kind of olefin-based elastomer, superior stretch and recovery. It's chemically stable. We use them in activewear and Easy Care stretch apparel. If you go to iTextiles, it kind of gives you a summary of elastomeric fibers: rubber, spandex, elastol, elastoester. I do want to mention one fiber called PLA. PLA is polylactic acid. It's a manufactured fiber where it has 85% by weight of lactic acid ester units, which are derived from natural sugars. So PLA is also used in 3D printers generally as one of the materials, because it melts and you can create 3D printing materials with PLA. Ingeo is an example of PLA made with sugars in corn. And we use PLA in fiber fill, non-woven applications, some apparel and home furnishings, also in non-fiber applications, disposable plastic products like cups and so on. This plastic cup is made out of Ingeo. That's a PLA-based material. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about some really cool fibers. These fibers are super expensive. 1 pound of some of those are in the $60, $70, $100 range. And these fibers are used for protective apparel, protective clothing. Most of those are industrial textiles, so we don't use them in regular garments, but we use them in clothing for astronauts, for example, or in uniforms for firefighters. These type of fibers can withstand very high temperatures. Most of these are aramid fibers. So aramid fibers are aromatic polyamide fibers. And these fibers are made out of a long chain synthetic polyamide, where at least 85% of the amide linkages are attached directly to 2 aromatic rings. They can be wet spun or dry spun. They can be staple or filament. They have exceptional strength, exceptional heat and flame resistance. You can basically put those type of fabrics in the flame and they're not going to catch flame and they're going to stay resistant. They have very high tensile strength. They're resistant to stretch. They don't stretch much. They have great abrasion resistance. They are synthetic, so they are oleophilic. They like oils and they get stained by oils, but they're resistant to most chemicals. They do have a lot of static buildup because they are hydrophobic. And because they are hydrophobic, they're very difficult to dye. They have poor resistance to acids also. So when I say aramid fibers, you may not have heard of aramid, but you probably heard of Nomex or Kevlar. So those are trademarks of aramid. And Nomex fabrics, Kevlar fabrics, those are made out of aramid fibers. Conex, Fenelon, these are other trade names. We use aramid fibers in protective apparel, technical fibers. When you think about Kevlar, we use them in radial tires, mechanical rubber goods, some protective apparel, cables, cordage, body armor, like this one here. Those are usually made out of Kevlar. Nomex is another aramid fiber that we use in protective clothing, firefighters apparel, race car driver suits, flame retardant furnishings for aircraft. So they have a lot of different uses. There are also another category of fibers, glass fibers. Glass fibers are manufactured fibers where the substance is glass or silicon dioxide, that's glass. They can be melt spun. They have very high tenacity. They don't have a lot of elongation, but they do have good elasticity for how much they actually elongate. They're brittle and they have poor flex abrasion resistance. So they do. So when I say glass fibers, I mean fiberglass, for example, is a glass fiber. They have high density and they are not absorbent. They're incombustible. They're resistant to sunlight and most chemicals. They're flame proof. They melt at 2400 degrees Fahrenheit. So that means to melt them, you need a very, very, very high temperature. So they don't melt easily. And they don't get affected by flame very easily. They're resistant to soiling. And some of the trade names of glass fibers is Miraflex, Fiberglass. Fiberglass is a registered trademark of glass fibers. Beta Glass, Cam Glass, Vitron, these are some trade names. We use glass fibers in interiors, in technical applications. We use them for flame retardant draperies or fiber bed for insulation in homes. So we don't use them in garments. And actually, you should not touch glass fibers because they will cause a lot of itching. So you don't ever want to touch them without gloves. Metallic fibers are another special use fibers. So these are manufactured fibers made out of metals. We generally laminate those type of fibers before we use them. You can see those are really cool for fashion products. Metallic fibers can be made out of gold, silver, brass, any type of metal, aluminum, stainless steel. You basically create superfine filaments out of those metals. And we use them in apparel, interiors, technical applications. This is an example of how it's processed. So, for example, if you want to make metallic fibers out of aluminum foil, you have these plastic films and you have the aluminum foil and you have adhesive that the plastic film attaches to. So the aluminum foil is basically laminated here, and then it's slit to turn it into tapes or yarns. You cannot iron those because the plastic that is used for laminating these metallic yarns melts if you iron them. So you can't iron metallic fibers. We usually blend them with other fibers to reduce static because it causes so much static. We use metallic fibers for decorative purposes in apparel or furnishings. Stainless steel fibers are also used in tires, wiring, missile nose cones, and also we use them in corrective heart surgery. This garment is made with metallic fibers. This is an example of metallic yarn that's wound on here. So they have a lot of shine and it adds interest to fashion garments. Okay, now let's look at iTextiles to see if we have anything that we haven't covered here. So aramid fibers, we talked about Nomex. There's also Thermalt, Hygiene Conex. These are other registered trademarks. Para-aramids, these are very strong fibers. They are impact resistant and cut resistant, which is why we use them in body armor or bulletproof vests and things like that. So Kevlar is an example of those. Twaron is a trademark of para-aramids. These are metallic fiber examples. So this basically concludes special use fibers. In your iTextiles, all of these are considered elastomeric fibers, but obviously aramid fibers are not elastomers, glass fibers are not elastomers, so I feel like this is a little misleading, but elastomeric fibers are fibers like rubber, spandex, lastol, and elastoester. Everything else we talked about, like metallic fibers, glass fibers, aramid fibers, those are not considered elastomeric fibers. Okay, so we are finished with fibers. In our next class, we are going to start talking about yarns.